Don't worry. Especially because we have a few new colleagues here at Interledger, and for our guests, I will start by saying that we had this initiative of lunch and learnings. I think last year were a couple of them, and they are a bit of informal chatting about different things related to the technology that we use here at Interledger Foundation. Could be directly related to what we do, or directly to anything tangential. Like I remember Jeremiah having one about the federalization of software and Mastodon and these kind of implementations that Mastodon is not directly to us working, but we can learn from its product. I don't think it was only about that, but sidely on the topic of federalization. And I don't remember the other one, but we do have a playlist at hand, so go ahead and check them. And last year, I think I was in all this discussion around the web monetization extension and the work that we're doing with the extension team. A lot of times we ended up checking for knowledge in terms of product or implementation to other add-ons. And to put a bit of pressure, one of the most used add-ons would be the blockers, and one of the most used, which I have to admit sometimes we do fight which ad blocker we use in the team, is made by eyeo. And a couple of us, we knew Christos working there, and especially on the relationship size that he's advocating for the work done at eyeo, the why behind, and also the how. And from that, we can learn especially how to deal with extension, why they're important. And we also asked to have an engineer from the team of the extension implementation to literally learn a bit more how they implemented the blocker extension, and especially on the topics that they are always in their mind to keep in track, being an add-on. One of the things that I always get from them is like the number of add-ons they block, and I'm always like, is this real, or are they just generating a random number that, hey, Ioana, we block these kind of websites for you? So that's a tough one to prove me that you really, really count that. But also other lessons learned about implementing one of the most popular extensions / add-ons around there. Thanks for everyone joining, and I'll give the floor. I think the first part will be a bit about the project by Christos.
Checking, screen sharing is working, yeah?
It.
Not anymore.
Yes.
There we go.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Oh, not
That's
anymore.
you.
Sorry, let me do
Or only
that
not anymore, yeah.
again.
It was only for a second.
I pressed the lock button on my
original.
keyboard.
It works
There
now.
we go.
Fantastic. Okay. So thank you all so much for this. Thank you for the opportunity of being here. This is super, super cool. We'll take you through some of the things, as you mentioned, Ioana. Really appreciate the opportunity. So my name's Rowan. I'm based in South Africa at the moment on the Eastern Coast. I've worked at eyeo for about 4 years now, remotely. I'm a code person. My labor is to exchange code for money, I guess. And I'm on the extensions team, working on Adblock and Adblock Plus and all the interesting complexities around that. Christos.
Hi, I'm Christos. I also work at eyeo. I do tech relations, trying to connect engineers and interested parties between each other, like you, for example. Thanks again for this opportunity. And I love the open web. Next slide, please. So really quickly, we're going to go through eyeo. What is eyeo? The acceptable ad standard, and explain our business model and how we do what we do. And then we're going to dive more into the technical aspect of it, like about building a web extension, how it works, open source filter lists, some changes with Manifest v3 if we have time. And yeah, and I'm going to also talk about evolving culture, engineering culture at eyeo. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt us at any time, or post it on the chat here. We're also gonna leave some space in the end. Before I go to the next slide, has anyone heard about eyeo? Who is eyeo? Did you know before? Like, yeah, reactions, on video, on chat, like any. So some of you know what eyeo is. Okay. Cool. Next slide, everyone, please. So eyeo is an ad tech company who's transforming the internet into a trusted and sustainable and accessible place. And we're well known from our products, main web extensions / add-on products, which is Adblock and Adblock Plus. eyeo started from Adblock Plus back in more than a decade ago, when with the creation of Adblock evolved to eyeo, and then the company started growing. Next slide, please. Our vision is a fair and prosperous internet for everyone, but how can we do that? That's a great mission statement. That's a great vision. How can we do that? Next slide, please. We do it by enabling content monetization for publishers, for advertisers, and also for ad filtering users, who more than 350 million users who have a better experience. So the idea is like to bring value to all these different parties. Next slide, please. And how we do that is through the acceptable ads standard. So this standard is a product of a research from people for the people. It's a standard that is governed and evolved by independent committee of industry experts. And how does it work? All of our products, they can allow only acceptable ads to go through if you want them to go through. And what does it mean? So there are some specific standards. So for example, static. The acceptable ads that go through needs to be static. We don't allow any videos. We don't allow any overlaying pop-ups or things like this. Distinction. The advertisement needs to be distinctive. It needs to mention, like, I don't go through an article and between the text I see an image and I'm not sure, is that an ad? Is that part of the article? No, if it's an ad, it needs to be distinctive in a specific place in the top or in the bottom of the page. And also the size of it should not exceed between 15 and 20% of the page. So all of these requirements compile the acceptable ad standard, which advertisers, publishers, and needs to meet in order for their advertisement to be served to our users, and that creates a way to monetize the ad filtering. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So here are like what is not an acceptable ad. An acceptable ad, as mentioned, is like ads with excessive or non-user initiated hover, or animated ones, autoplays videos with sound. Like, we don't want this experience. Overlay, no. So we offer a value proposition for the user, a value proposition. Next slide, please. We offer a value proposition for the user to gain control of their online experience, but also give the opportunity for content creators and publishers to be rewarded for the content. And also, and that happens by offering the opportunity for advertisers and consumers to connect on mutual agreed terms. Next slide, please. So units from our products, Adblock and Adblock Plus, these are the customer-facing products we're well known for. There is also Block-through. Block-through is an advertising technology that allows publishers to serve ads to Adblock users. And also we have some other custom solutions for ad filtering within the browser for companies like Aloha browser, for example. If you're a company that has a browser and they want to offer content filtering, ad filtering to the user out of the bat, they can use our technologies to do that. But diving more into the technology and how all this works together, I'm just going to invite Rohan to take it away and give us like a more detailed diving about how we filter stuff.
Thank you, Christos. Okay, so web extensions. Adblock and Adblock Plus are web extensions. What the hell are those? very simply, they're apps that you can extend your browser with. Cool things you can add that edit pages, improve them, add silly images, remove silly images, add style sheets, etc. You can make interesting changes to your experience. Very, very cool. It uses standard technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. No fancy other languages. It's all web technologies. And from a user perspective, you would see mainly three parts. You would interact in three ways. An extension is the background area, the space in the browser. We call it a background script. In MP3, more recently, it's called service workers. Interesting difference we'll get to later. But that's where most of the logic happens. All the actual code mostly would live there. But that's not enough to do everything. There are also content scripts. Content scripts are JavaScript files that get injected into every page you visit generally. So it's code that runs on that particular page, right? In the actual, as if the website had it, basically. There are limitations, but yeah. And then finally, the pop-up. This is a screenshot of my current couple of extensions I took earlier. From clicking on that button, you can then see the actual pop-up for that extension. Lovely. Some cool examples here that I can definitely recommend. Dark Reader, it's fantastic, makes everything dark. You don't flashbang yourself that often, slightly less. Very, very cool. 1Password, if please have a password manager, definitely. But that extension makes it super, super simple to then put your passwords into whatever text box on whatever website you're on. Very cool. There are others. I remember leaving my machine unlocked many years ago. I came back and someone installed an extension that replaces every image with a picture of Nicolas Cage's face. So extensions can do awesome things. That definitely being an example. So our extensions, Adblock and Adblock Plus, are used by over 100 million people collectively. I think at the moment, Adblock Plus is on 40-something million, and Adblock is on 60-something million, which is crazy. That is very, very crazy. So that's an extension. What is an ad? This slide might feel familiar to you if you've been on the internet at all in any capacity recently. It's just a lot of stuff, right? You go to a website that has like learn a cool recipe and it's just things and stuff. So of course it's kind of annoying. Definitely don't want that. So an ad from a web perspective is very similar to just any content, right? It's an image. A normal JPEG can be an ad. So that could be served to you. It could also be in the HTML itself. You could write actual HTML that goes here, buy stuff and make it animate, etc. So in these three examples, just to get a sense of getting into how ad blocking works, this first one would be some sort of image, right? Ads.com. I don't know if that's a real website, probably, but ads.com maybe has an image called advertimage.jpg, and your browser would get that, right? Like it would try to render that. So interesting. You'd need to be able to block that. Another approach would be in JavaScript going, hey, let's write some code that actually puts an image in some place, right? So that's another file that other ads.com might serve, an ad script. And then I'm sure we're all familiar with trackers. Just we need all the data in the world. We need to know how often you sleep, where you go, etc. Yeah, another form of that. So that would be non-behavioral, more just tracking data. So those are examples. It's way more complicated than this, but for the sake of this, how might you block those? The first approach would be called request blocking. The idea here is that your browser, when navigating to any page on the internet, has to go, okay, cool. What images do I need? What scripts do I need? What CSS files do I need? And it would go one by one, or probably asynchronously, but it would one by one go, cool, I want this thing. Now, these two browser APIs, web request and MV2, we'll talk about that in a moment, and declarative net request, those give you tools to go, okay, browser, whenever you make a request to that particular image, tell me first. And I'd get to decide if you should or shouldn't load that, right? So on the previous slide, thankfully it doesn't animate again. If advert_image.jpg gets requested by the browser, we get to go yes or no, right? Fantastic. This is kind of cool because it doesn't even render on you don't even experience it. It's blocked before it gets downloaded. So it's quite nice in terms of saving bandwidth. That's super cool. Now, you could build an extension that just goes, okay, if I'm on Facebook, I don't want to load that thing, for example. But then, okay, now I'm on a different website. Now I need to block a different thing. And if we all had to maintain our own versions of this, it can get much. It can get a bit much. Similarly, if you want to update an extension with new rules to use, that's going to be very tedious because there's a whole web store process to submit extensions to. So we use this lovely thing called filter lists. They're a collection of rules. There's a whole fancy slide dedicated to that. But in a nutshell, this is how all of this works. Not all ads are just images or scripts. Like, for example, if the script that you use for, I want to make this payment, also sneaks in a little bit of code about, let's also show an ad. Now suddenly you can't make payments because you're blocking an ad. Oh, snap. So this is not the whole picture. Request blocking can't do everything. You can see this, by the way, if you press F12, go to your developer tools. In the network tab, you'll see your browser loading so many files. It's insane how many files get loaded in the modern web. What do these rules look like? What do these filters look like? Like this. So in this example, I'm going to use the chat sometimes just to share some links, by the way. That link rendered weird, but yes, you get the point. Don't click on that. It's not a real thing. Just as an example, this rule says if an image has a path that contains the word banner and anything else, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and then image, if it contains that, that should be blocked. So this is like a wildcard regex approach to block all things like that. This is what these individual filters look like, these individual rules. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you just block an image, if you've ever built a website, it'll show a broken image, right? It'll be like, oh, this image couldn't load, and that space would just be there, right? So it's another reason for this is not the full picture. This just blocks those requests from happening. Generally, this is great for JavaScript files, but yeah, it's more than that. What does this look like? This chaotic slide might seem a little intimidating, but this is the view of pressing F12 and going to the network tab. This is I don't remember the site I visited, a random site full of ads, and this is the result of that. In red are all the requests that got blocked. These are post and get requests, etc. Here, ping from googlesyndication.com got blocked. That ping never happened because this extension prevented it from actually happening, which is very cool. Any other, news24.com, that's the website I visited. I think not so good South African news website. Don't go there. But the items in white, those ended up being served, right? So this icon, something called rum, I have no idea what that is, but other normal files still got served. The website remains functional. So this is a great way of tracking, of blocking sort of any images you don't want, any trackers you don't want, any JavaScript files you don't want. Lovely. Then the second approach, the other way, the more sort of complex and interesting way, we call content filtering. This removes dynamic elements from a page. So if you've done any HTML stuff before, there's a whole bunch of different elements there, and you can normally select them based on like ID or their hierarchy or CSS classes, etc. And with this approach, you can then go, okay, cool. If this page has an element that matches this query, hide it. So adblockers use injecting CSS or just extra JavaScript content scripts to handle all of this. If it matches that rule that you defined, we hide it. This is much more flexible. You can hide anything. You can like set up a rule that hide every second image called potato. You can totally do that with a very interesting regex. This is more resource intensive, of course, because it executes actual code in your browser. So that's a big concern. And it's also called cosmetic filtering because after you've blocked some stuff, it would suck if where all the millions of ads were, it's just white space. So using this, you can also hide blocks and elements to make the website still look good and functional. This is what those look like. The rules are slightly different because that CSS selection happens here. So in this example, anything on example.com or example.net, this is how we select the item we want to block. So this means any element with a CSS class of advert would get blocked. I don't think many websites, or maybe they do actually, but I think places like Facebook and Google, they probably won't just call it advert, right? It would be too easy. I know Facebook actually have done lovely things like nesting spans in between and making this approach insane. But yeah, there's a big, awesome story about eyeo and Facebook's cat and mouse stuff. I can encourage reading that. Yeah, so what this ends up doing is for any element that has that CSS class, it'll apply display none as a CSS property. This is what that looks like. This is just me in my VS Code earlier. So I have a div with some awesome content. Lovely. I have an ad. Hey, you should buy this thing. It is amazing. And it has that class. So applying this filter to this page, assuming this page is run on example.com, you would end up with this in the HTML, where this style property is added. Display none, important. Important, of course, if you're into CSS stuff, means like really, please don't let any CSS specificity override this. And yeah, that ends up with that element just not being visible. Again, this is an extremely simple case. It gets way more complicated than this, but this is the sort of 80-20% thing. This is most of it. Then, for things that can't be blocked by resource request blocking, request filtering, content filtering, we have snippets. Other extensions call this scriptlets as well. Same thing. These are more advanced little blocks of code, JavaScript functions that you can execute. So you can set up a filter, a rule that executes a function that is made available. Of course, those functions are controlled by the ad blockers. They're not just any function. If you could run any function, that would be crazy. But in this example, on example.com, this makes it a snippet, by the way, we will call the log function and give it these parameters. What that'll do is on that page, when rendered in the console, it'll log hello world, for example. This can get very interesting if you want to read more. There it is. Oh, sorry, I'm only now seeing RUM is real user monitoring. Probably, I think. Amazing. So in the link I just shared, it goes through all the different snippets that eyeo currently has available. So some interesting other snippets would be stuff like cookie remover. You could, on a particular website, have a rule that removes a particular cookie, for example, or you can replace fetch requests. So instead of fetching this resource, don't do that. Just have this object. A particularly interesting one that probably shouldn't talk too much further about, but skip video, for example. If you're on a page that maybe serves videos, a massive page, and how to deal with the interaction there of not seeing a video if certain circumnavigation stuff gets weird, yeah, then you can just skip the video altogether. Another interesting snippet. One last thing, machine learning is also used here. So on certain pages, you can actually learn about like, okay, ads generally look like this, dynamically filter them, which is also awesome and very, very cool. You would have to get a different person to talk about that, though. I haven't been too involved, but it's super, super cool. How does all of that work? What is the thing that makes all of this work? Well, filter lists. That's it. Actually, it's simply if it weren't for filter lists, I think ad blockers wouldn't be a thing. Filter lists are open source, massive lists of individual rules that amazing human beings spend a lot of time putting together, and specifically, they spend their time going, okay, here's a new page. There's a weird ad. Let's block that. EasyList is an example of that. They're probably one of the cool big ones. This is their GitHub page. Over here, you can add new items to them. You can submit a change. If you look at the issues and merge requests over there, many happen every day. It's constantly updating. Yeah, you can contribute. If you find something, please contribute. That would be fantastic. Yeah. So pulling it all together, just as a quick summary of overall, on the left-hand side, this is a little screenshot of EasyList as it currently exists. Each of these items are individual rules that serve a particular purpose, and how that translates into how an extension works is I'm a user in this crudely drawn Excalibur little diagram. On my computer, I'm on a browser that has an ad blocker, and that ad blocker constantly asks the question for every single page you visit, for all the elements, all the requests, does this particular item match any of the rules of anything in my filter list or filter lists? You can have many. If it does match, that means I should block it. So block it, hide it, apply the filtering, don't show it, etc. Or if it's not on that list, show it. It's a normal thing. It's a rum request or whatever. It's a normal thing that should be there, right? From an eyeo perspective, we also have the acceptable ad standard, as Christos mentioned. The filters there are slightly different. They are called allowing filters. So when an ad is deemed acceptable, they have a little at in front of them. There's a whole filter list just for that. In Adblock and Adblock Plus, you can actually turn that off if you want. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is how ad blockers work. Recently, Google had a bit of a change. So it used to be that manifests were with MV2 was the version of all the manifest files. A manifest file is basically just what makes it an extension. It puts it all together. It's like the packaged JSON, if you're into Node, of extensions. So we moved from MV2 to MV3. What that means is a lot of changes for ad blockers. We at eyeo have been impacted in a very interesting big way. Some of the key changes are, instead of using this web request model where we get to control, hey, don't show that or do show that, we now have to declaratively at build time submit as an extension to have all the rules in place statically immediately. Here is everything we need to block. That was a massive change. Service workers, this is the performance part of what makes MV3 better from Chrome's perspective. It's more performant because service workers can actually shut down and then get woken up again at any point. So a lot of code changes around that as well, no longer having that sort of static work environment. First turn of the event loop, all of this means is you can't dynamically attach event listeners anymore. Again, a lot of changes. You have to do it initially on startup. Quite interesting. And then finally, the filter list standard. So the way EasyList has all of these, there's a difference with how Chrome interprets those. Chrome calls them rules. So there was a lot of interesting conversion going from a filter to a rule and what that looks like. It's not a one-to-one mapping. One filter could have many rules. So there's a lot of complexity there as well. Also, this change limited the amount of items we could have. It used to be in MV2, you could have an infinite number of these items, of these filters. Now there's a limit. For static, I think it's 300,000, and dynamic, currently it's 30,000, which is enough. Thankfully, the Chrome team have been very open and iterative and good about sort of feedback and stuff like that, at least in terms of these limits. But yeah, from our perspective, thankfully, we had an SDK in place already that allows us to have MV2 versions of our extension still and MV3. We also have Adblock Plus and Adblock on Firefox and Opera and Edge, etc., which all are still in the MV2 world for now. So given that we have an SDK, that made things a lot easier. There were some bugs along the way. There was a particularly hairy internal error is all it said. And it was like, oh, we broke something. And it's unfortunately problems in Chrome, it turned out. But thankfully, the Chrome DevRel people, Oliver, Sebastian, Simeon, another person, they've been awesome. They've been exceptionally cool and helping us. We have meetings with them all the time. They're very open to feedback. And yeah, this is not speaking on behalf of eyeo. This is a personal opinion. Is MV3 better for extensions? Probably, broadly, like from a security and performance perspective, and from an iterative perspective, yeah, seems cool. For ad blockers, though, probably not. It took an extreme amount of effort to convert all of our code to support MV3, like a ridiculous amount of effort. And it was a forced change, right? Like we'd rather be spending our time doing other cool things than to have to deal with this with a deadline. It was a large amount of time to deal with it, but still. Generally, it's less flexible than it was on MV3. And there are some advanced ad blocking things that are definitely worse. There have been some awesome articles written by many companies about how MV3 is bad for ad blocking. Cool. So in dealing with MV3, second last slide, by the way, as a company, we had to adapt. As an engineering effort, we had to evolve a lot to stay on top of things. One of the big sort of key things involved here is we released this code to hundreds of millions of users. Before eyeo, I've never worked in a context like that. It's always been like a couple of thousand at best. Now it's literally millions, which is insane. So to adapt to that, we've recently made all our processes, all our technical efforts be a lot more collaborative. We have multiple teams working in different interesting ways, and we've put all our code into a monorepo. Adblock and Adblock Plus is in single repo now, and they share much more code than they have before. This makes things a lot easier. Given that we're in a web store, we can't just easily go, oh, there's a fire, upload a new version to the website. It goes through a whole review process, which means we have to kind of be a bit more careful. And in that regard, we have a lot of continuous integration, a lot of testing happening. One key difference I can definitely recommend to pretty much everyone is to shift testing way to the left. It used to be the case that testing is a manual thing that humans do extensively and go, I am now manually clicking this with my mouse and checking things. And if there's any problems, it puts the whole release cycle into a weird state. We've, over the last couple of months, years, and definitely recently, extensively improved our automated testing abilities. There's been crazy amounts of work in that regard. And we're much more confident that every single commit that lands into our monorepo now is ready to go. We've also spent a lot of time automating a lot of our release process, updating our rules to filters to rules, etc. That helped a lot. So now we can release way more frequently, which is fantastic. And yeah, there's always room for improvement, but it makes it easy if you work with exceptional humans, and that makes everything so much better and easier to improve. Yeah, so just quickly, if you have no time and you wanted to build an extension, it's one of those things that initially it seems crazy and very complicated. And then you do it and you realize, okay, this is actually very, very easy. Until you have to build an ad blocker, and it's crazy and very complicated again. But for non-ad blocker stuff, I can highly recommend using this extension.js platform. It has an awesome thing where npm run dev, and you have a browser that magically opens, and your extension is just there, ready to be interacted with. It's fantastic. Definitely do that. If you ever want to do this, both Chrome and Firefox have amazing documentation on building extensions. And if you want or need help, I'd be very keen to interact on email or however the hell you want to interact. That would be super, super cool. Extensions are a lot of fun. It's a weird niche that not too many people have or have ever encountered, but building them is insane. And there's a lot of space for cool things. That is it. I think, thank you. Thank you so much. I think any questions, any things that you have been, please.
I have two questions. The first one, it's related to content filtering. So when you said that there is a certain, let's say, pattern or rule that let's say you can block a certain element from the page when it has a class. Why just hide it with CSS and not just remove the whole node from the document?
You absolutely can, especially with snippets. You can literally go that element dot remove. Generally, my understanding at least is that it's much less of a cost of just quickly applying the CSS filter, or just going, or not filter, applying that CSS style specifically to that element. It's extremely quick. It just is hidden immediately. And on further navigation, it'll just get loaded again, but then that CSS is cached. So it's, I think, as I understand it, it's just so much easier. Yeah, applying that. You can remove it though with a snippet. In some cases, it's just too complicated to simply hide one element. But yeah, with snippets, then you can do awesome things like removing it.
Okay.
Does that answer
Now
your question?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
And related to MV3, I know you mentioned as well the idle for service workers. We know we face some issues with the service worker shutting down and basically the extension stopped working because the service worker stopped. How did you manage to keep the service worker alive?
So that was one of our first, when we saw that that's one of the changes, like, oh, cool, they want to kill the service worker. We'll just force it to always be not killable. We'll make it immortal. But no, we didn't. We allow it to die. The key for us, at least, is that when it does start up again, that everything should still have its correct state, right? So that did mean a lot of interacting with the storage API to make sure everything is, once it starts up again, in a good place. Because a lot of the request filtering now happens on the browser itself and not in the extension anymore, it doesn't always necessarily have to wake up the service worker if it's just applying those DNR rules. So in our extensions, at least, we were able to get it to work that the service worker can die. The interesting portion, though, was how do we test that? Because the service workers, I think, as you know, they can randomly shut down and then wake up, right? So testing that is a bit of a pain. We actually applied a pattern called fuzz testing to just, we were able to, it's quite a complex thing. We have an article somewhere about it, but we were able to control the service workers, shut down, and then see what happens when it wakes up again. Because in our case, the same states and same functionality should still apply as it did before. I'm sure in most cases, but yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes. This was one of our issues, basically to maintain the state. But in our case, I think that requires a lot more things to do to interact with the storage API because we rely on some external resources as well, and some of the things you cannot really store in the storage. And
right,
it's a childish way, I would say, at the moment. We just set some alarms every couple of seconds to just keep the extension alive. But yeah,
if it
that
works,
answers my question.
yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Sid, please.
Yeah, I had questions about testing. So you said you had first testing, and I think you have end-to-end testing also. So we are using Playwright right now, but it only supports Chromium browsers. How do you support testing with Safari and Firefox?
So we use, because we have multiple extensions and an SDK, in our SDK, we wanted to be able to test it in isolation and then also the two extensions and their interactions. So we use a combination of WebDriver IO and Selenium, and a whole bunch of interesting Docker setup things. There's a whole article. Let me try to find it quick. Let me stop sharing. But yeah, we set up using not Playwright. I don't remember why we ended up not going with Playwright, but yeah, using Selenium, we're able to test combination of Selenium and Docker. Yeah, we actually have a cool. Let me find it quick. There's a thing called Get Browser Binary that one of the awesome engineers that I work with all the time implemented as a way to get the actual the actual browser that you want to run the extension on, to then yeah, load the extension into its context and then do all the testing. You can see it here. I'll send the npm package there. This is one of the ways we, yeah, got all the different browsers to actually run all of our tests. Let me show you one more quick thing. For every single commit, maybe this is illuminating, I hope. For every single commit that we currently get onto our monorepo, we run extensive pipelines, and in there it's all open, so you should be able to see all the different commands. Adblock is red right now. Oh no, but yeah, this is an example of a pipeline that runs per commit that gets merged, and in there you'll see, yeah, the end-to-end testing and how we test on various browsers. What was interesting for us as well is this manifest change, because now we don't only have to go test on Firefox, test on Edge, test on Chrome, but we also want to test with the latest beta version of Chrome to make sure nothing obvious breaks. We also want to test on the last supported version of each of these browsers. And to add another dimension to it, we also want to test the MV2 context and the MV3 context. So yeah, testing has been a big, old, complicated, fun part of our day today. But yeah, long answer short, Selenium WebDriver and getting binaries from get browser binary. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question? I hope.
It does. We will try to see how much it is. Because right now we are doing playwright with Edge and Chrome only.
Interesting.
Build on Sid question, because he does run or reads write the end-to-end testing here for our extension. Do you have a dedicated team or is part of the developers' work? And in general, because you said that you tried to shift the testing from more of the left approach to integrated one from the start. Do you have a dedicated team or is more as the common effort?
So we used to have a dedicated team. We had people who would be QA testers formally. There are still in some teams that as a role, like I'm a manual QA testing person, but because of this aim towards automating things a lot more, yeah, it's very much expected of all engineers to write end-to-end tests per feature. It makes a lot more sense that way, because yeah, like I mentioned earlier, it's very tricky if you do manual QA, because there's always room for manual QA. I think personally, especially in an exploratory way, right? But when it comes to the more tedious sort of like, does this thing still work? There's so much value in automation, because unless you're going to manually check that with every change, check everything, it gets a little crazy. I can very, very, very quickly, I'm going to share my screen for literally just one moment. This here. So this is how we used to do things. Sorry if this looks crazy, but basically there are some code changes. They have some code review applied to them. It gets merged. Then when we do a release, there's a feature freeze it used to be on a Wednesday. We would then do a lot of regression testing. That it had some automated element to it, but a lot of that was just manual, as shown here. Once that's done, that would take days, right? Because there's a lot and it's very complicated, especially with multiple browsers, multiple manifest versions, and so many interesting features. Eventually we would get it approved, and then this is the whole release process we had, and eventually yay, it's on the web store for many millions of users. The way we changed that here is that now code changes happen, and so many of those tests happen immediately for that particular item. The agreement now is that code does not get merged to main unless it is confirmed. Anything that lands on our main branch we are confident it's not tested after whatever. We are able to release now at any single point. So still room for manual QA and teams, at least the extension teams we have. We still have awesome people who do a lot of this testing and focus on this, but we have a role called software developer in test as a There are engineers that focus on writing automated tests, because this is a massive and complicated and often undervalued by business people. So
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, I know. It's always a debate if you really need engineers for testing or developers should do their part. And after that, if you ask, well, what happens to the bias of the developer or also the implementation
Sure.
only of the happy paths? So, and I agree with both having some manual exploration, but that cannot fit every time you push something. Really, even for our small team and our small extension, Seed is running the end-to-end tests, and we did had literally right now our PM found an issue that is not reproducing with automated test exactly because it's a combination of different parameters. And to add to the complexity, if you have different browsers, different operating systems, and on top of that also add in our case currencies and countries and wallets, it's a never-ending complexity of testing. So definitely not manageable manually, not efficient, but a combination of both always helps. Also on this topic, because I also know how it is to have so many users, do you get feedback from the users? Do you watch the marketplace reviews? Is anyone monitoring? Do you have more a product within the software engineering team?
Yes, we do have a customer escalation team, awesome humans who specifically deal with that. When there is feedback on the web store or through the support channels, hey, this is broken, hey, this thing doesn't work for me, etc. It's a sort of layer. I almost said protective layer, but you should not protect engineers from feedback, I would say, right? But yes, we have a team of people who deal with interacting with users who have problems, etc. They are very, very cool. Often it's resolved at that level, but then often it can't be resolved at that level. And then it comes to the engineering teams as like, hey, a defect, something that is wrong. And then, yeah, we deal with that. Been on a couple of calls with users. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, there's a whole interesting, complex, and ever evolving system, right? Because sometimes you really need that, and other times you just everything's fine and stable for months, and then everything is on fire again. And yeah.
We also often do research. Have our product researchers do some market research, trying to figure out like the needs of our users. That's also how it happened with flexible ad standard, and monitor as well some social channels like reviews to figure out if there are issues, or web store or marketplace reviews, and then take action based on that as well. So yeah, it's a long learning process.
Oh, of course. I do have a question related to research, but I wanted to say, like, I love how when we build this complexity, but whenever we had to test back Firefox, it was always like people asking me, or I reported the bug, were like, did you try with a clean profile? And I was like, who on earth at this point in time still has a clean profile with no add-ons installed and no passwords or anything else, like it shouldn't be by default only working with a clean profile. But yeah. But related to the research, Christos, at the beginning when you presented that you had this category of filtering good, bad, and in between, I don't remember the third, and you mentioned the research. Was this a permanent team that eyeo has, or was an externalized action done with a third party, or is it even more ongoing addressing all these changes?
Yes, let me get the website of the Acceptable Ads Committee. So this work started from eyeo. This is something that was funded by eyeo because we believe that we need to have a new value proposition that we can monetize and help and empower the web with. So right now this committee is independent. It's not eyeo members. We sometimes often dedicate resources to help their needs. And also this committee has meets on a regular basis to actually iterate on the standard as they see fit. For example, like a debate, will they ever allow video acceptable ads on mobile? For example, that's a question that the committee might be might be discussing. Also, like how we interact with other standards, because there's also the coalition for better arts. There, how we can enable more people in the industry to do that. So yeah, it's an independent committee supported by eyeo. And on the website, you can find all the necessary resources about like the research, the standard, and how to stay on top of any changes or how to use the standard.
Good. Anyone?
I'm curious
Go ahead.
I'm curious if during your user interviews or your user feedback, you get complaints about the level of permissions you have to have in order to do content scripts and monitoring traffic and stuff like that.
Absolutely. We learned a weird lesson a while ago already, where if you introduce a new permission into an extension, there's a little pop-up that could appear saying, hey, this extension wants to have this new permission. Are you sure you want to do that? It could be dodgy, etc. And with that, immediately many users are like, what is this, right? We don't want that. So indeed, for us, when introducing any new permissions, it's a very carefully considered thing. For the existing stuff, for most extensions, the content script can immediately get loaded in automatically. So from that level, it should be fine. Yeah. Sorry. Does that answer your question?
There is one. No, there is one. I think the scariest one of all is the one where you monitor network traffic, because you have to inspect the contents of every page or something like that, where everybody instantly thinks you're scraping their web traffic and sending it backwards. That is the one we have. Like, we've tried getting rid of as many as we had, but that's the one we can't get away with, because we actually have to look in that page for HTML tag, and that's, I mean, our user base is now very small. It used to be a bit bigger when it was run by Coil back in the day, but this is one of the feedbacks that's been following us since the Coil days, when it was like 5,000, 10,000 active users. I think the biggest complaint we had was the permissions.
This is something also we shared with our friends over at Google, because it was like the pop-up that you would get is like, hey, this web extension is gonna have access to all your information, including your usernames and passwords. And we're like, well, yes and no. So this is something that we've been trying to advocate for, to try to change all these messages, to make it more explanatory to the user, and give like and not scare everyone away that easily.
Any other question for others? Because I do have one more, but I want to give Jeremiah, go ahead.
Sure. First of all, thanks for the technical overview of how the blacklists work, and also for your forthright perspective on Chrome's manifest v3 changes hurting ad blocking. I think it's good to hear people working there actually share their thoughts on that, because there's a lot of questions about the motivation for doing it. So I'll say, like, I think there's a place for free access to content supported by privacy preserving ad technologies, and I also think it's really great that you're pushing the acceptable ad things. It's something I do hope more ad networks start to do. I've also heard like some people equate ad blockers to piracy, and I think it's really unfair, because like there's no requirement for my browser to load all of the links that it sent. But I do think like the piracy analogy is pretty interesting, because piracy was something that was pretty much defeated by the music industry, basically by finding a better business model with music streaming subscriptions. And I think that there's something there. And that's what was so interesting to me about the Interledger Foundation's work with web monetization. So I know that eyeo owned Flatter, whom I was a big fan of and user of for many years. And years ago, we didn't get so much interest in collaborating with us on web monetization. So I'm just curious, now that web monetization is maturing, maybe any interest in doing something even better than ads by like helping content creators actually be supported directly by their audiences.
That's a great. I share your opinion. that's a great segue to invite you to talk with some other people within eyeo who might be more relevant. I'm really happy to bring that up to the chain, to be honest, because I truly believe personally as Christos that we have an opportunity to give power back to the user, to give the user more choice and improve their online experience, while at the same time there is like a fair value proposition for the content creators and advertisers. And that accessible ads is like a step towards that. There are other ideas for how we can do that. After this call, I'm more than happy to connect you or any other person interested with our friends at eyeo to discuss, like, if there is any opportunity for collaboration or like, yeah. I mean, as far as I understand, we have aligned missions here, so.
I want to be conscious of the time as we are right on spot. Christos, Rowan, are you still able to 3 minutes, or we are closing it here?
Sure.
I don't know if we
Sure.
need those.
Yeah.
So
Happy
are there
to.
any other?
And we're losing
curious.
Ioana.
Yes.
I think she said
Is
if there are any
there-
other questions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a very particular question about DNR. So, Robin, so if we reach the limits for DNR, like if you have too many rules, is the performance better than the older web request model, or does DNR still suffer like if you have too many rules?
So with the DNR approach, once you reach that limit, you simply can't add more. More meaning more filters, right? So effectively that equates then to the quality of the experience as a user. There would be filters that you then just don't have. What's interesting here is in a dynamic context, filters get updated all the time, right? But extensions can only release so frequently. So in order to always have the latest filters, we have to have this whole complex diffing mechanism of what was the state at the point when the extension got released and what is the state now, get that diff and apply that as a dynamic set of filters. That dynamic limit is 30,000, yes, 30,000. So when you reach that limit, what it means is you can't apply any more filters. And then what that means is you don't get the newest filters and then a poorer experience. So in terms of performance, I think it's probably maybe even a little better now because it gets run on a Chrome level. Chrome does that sort of matching and going like, what is the rule I have? What is the request being made? So it doesn't have to go through the extension. So I think that's one of Google's claims of like better performance in that regard. Does that answer your question, Sid?
Yeah, but also lesser rules. I mean, doing less is always
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, there's less flexibility, and you also have to now adhere to this framework where Adblock has had in MV2 some pretty advanced things you can do, very complicated things, but now it has to be in this DNR framework. So yeah, pros and cons, definitely.
Thank you.
Cool.
We're definitely navigating how often to release too, especially now that we are public with them, but it's not promoted. So it's a silent public beta. And we officially in the team accepted that we are going to do sprints and releases each 2 weeks. But let's see how that goes. And we learned. One more on the testing and in general user experience. Do you do any A/B testing while implementing something, or it's not a common?
Fascinating timing. We haven't before, but late last year we did actually start implementing our own little framework for some basic A/B testing, where we can apply some variants to different things. So that's an ongoing thing, and it's part of this whole evolution of our engineering efforts, where the more feedback, the better. I think there are limits to that statement, of course, but in general, the more feedback you can get, it tends to be better. So in order to release more often, more confidently, more whatever, yeah, we currently it's called splits, A/B testing, etc. Yeah. So yes, that is something we're very actively working on. Literally looked at some code earlier today focused on that. So yes. Do you currently do you use any tool or anything like that for your case?
Nothing A/B testing because we don't have users yet much, but probably on the longer term we'll try to implement, especially because we don't have that. I would say like we are not so blocked or limited on how we display things. It's a new ground for us. There are not many extensions doing the same thing to have a standardized. We do look at your ad one is yours because it's privacy related and taking care of people information. I know our devs love OnePass also, and that inspires us a bit more. I see everyone is very fan of that. So yes, so probably when we are going to reach to a level of users that we constantly have, yes, at this point we're doing testing internally and with our community, limited community on web monetization. Yeah. And I think that's all from my side. The other question will be like if people implement anything to reply to people, then monetize them through the web pages. If they implement a pop-up or something nice to say to people like, hey, thanks for your support, will that be mean ad, bad ad, or good bad ad? Or how do we go on the good side of it? I'm kidding. That will be a discussion with the engineers, web developers, on how to be on the good side of the web even after they adopt us. But I'll keeping an eye on that research to see more about it. Okay, a few over time. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick closing remark. Very keen to interact on any even private projects. That's super cool. Any extension related things, any JavaScript related things, feel free to ask more questions or shout out or however I can be useful. That would be super cool. So thank you.
Yeah, you have our emails from the calendar invitation. Also, we will be circling the slide deck. So yeah, feel free to reach to us any given time for pretty much anything.
Open source and inviting community, just saying so. Thank you so much.
All good.
Go ahead, Alex, sorry. Or not?
I was muted.
Ah, I heard your voice, sorry. I just was saying a big thank you to for joining us and staying over time and giving us so much information from their work. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate
Thank
Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
invitation. Have a nice day.
You're all amazing.
Bye, y'all.
Take care. Have an amazing
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.